Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today we are going over our previews and predictions for what should be another great week of college football. It's week 12 of the 2024 college football season. And just as a quick note, they've been doing a lot of yard work outside, so we might be featuring some of the yard work guys. They've been loud. I don't know what's going on. But as always, be sure to like and subscribe. And just as a reminder, we have our $100 giveaway going for the season. Be sure to follow us on our social medias for a chance to win. And without further ado, let's jump into some games to watch, starting tonight with UCLA at Washington. This is a huge game for both of these teams. UCLA has been on a tear as of late, winning their last 3 games in a row, and they can inch ever so closer to bowl eligibility with a win here. But Washington can achieve said bowl eligibility with a win here also. They'll play this game at home against a familiar opponent in the UCLA Bruins. Only familiar in name though. That team looks rejuvenated under Deshaun Foster. Looking forward to seeing if they can keep it up here. And for the Saturday slate, let's start with Utah at 18th ranked Colorado. Utah is coming off a near win over the undefeated BYU Cougars last week. Now they're traveling to Boulder to take on the red hot Colorado Buffaloes in what should be a pretty decent matchup if the Utes can have the kind of performance they had last week. But that is a huge if, considering how strong Colorado's offense has looked recently. Now let's go to the ACC and look at Syracuse at Cal. Both of these teams have been relatively inconsistent this year. Syracuse has lost 2 of their last 3 games, while Cal has won 2 of their last 3. The orange quarterback, Kyle McCord, has been very hot and cold, which has been brutal for Syracuse because their offense essentially revolves around him. They average less than 90 yards per game on the ground, just 3 yards per carry on average. Not a lot to show for there. And it's similar for Cal, just 3.4 yards per carry on average. They lose Jaden Ott for most of the season. They haven't been very efficient on that front, and they've looked a lot better passing this year than running, which should make for an interesting quarterback duel. And now let's stay put in the ACC and look at Boston College at 14th ranked SMU. This is a huge game for SMU, obviously, because they want to keep their playoff dreams alive. They've been very efficient practically everywhere this year, but they're coming into this one going against a new look Boston College team led by Grayson James, who did look better than Thomas Castellanos did last week, at least throwing the ball. Castellanos actually gets benched and he transfers out this week. Unfortunate situation there, but if the Eagles can run the ball like they did last week and be able to push the ball down the field through the air, they should stand a very solid chance here. And now let's look at Virginia at 8th ranked Notre Dame. The Cavaliers have been far from a great team this year. They've looked average at best for most of the season, but they did end their 3-game losing skid last week with a huge win over top 25 Pitt last week. Notre Dame will be a much different ball game, especially on the ground, but at the very least, we know that Virginia is capable of putting together a solid game and taking down a team who isn't having their best game. So Notre Dame can't come out slow here. They're going to need to take this one seriously. They do play Army next week, so a potential letdown spot is at play here, which does make this matchup one to keep an eye on for us this week. And next, let's look at Nebraska at Southern Cal. This is a huge matchup for both of these teams. Both programs have made major changes coming into this one. USC has benched quarterback Miller Moss in favor of the UNLV transfer Jaden Maivia, and Nebraska took it a step further and promoted former Houston and West Virginia head coach Dana Holgorsen to their offensive coordinator and offensive play caller, effective immediately, which makes this one virtually unpredictable. These teams could come out and look completely different for better or for worse, both of whom are in the hunt for bowl eligibility still. Nebraska with 5 wins, USC with 4 wins. So if you can tune into this one, it should be an all-out blast. And now let's look at Baylor at West Virginia. This is a big matchup in the middle of the Big 12, and these teams are actually very similar. Same record at 5-4. Both have had somewhat disappointing years. Some very big missed opportunities on both sides this year. Either of these teams really could have 1 or 2 more wins if just a couple more things went their way, and they're both looking to end the season well and head into the offseason with some momentum for next year. And they're both starting new quarterbacks who have jump-started their offenses. West Virginia's Nico Marchiol and Baylor's Sawyer Robertson should make for an interesting quarterback battle and an interesting game all around. And next, let's look at first ranked undefeated Oregon traveling to Madison to play Wisconsin. This is another test for Oregon. Obviously, we're expecting a Duck win here, but the road environment in Madison at Camp Randall Stadium is not one to be overlooked. It's one of the most hostile in the country, and the Badgers aren't a bad team. They really just need to put together a great game in this one, and they could absolutely stand a chance here, especially if they can get that run game going like they were able to do earlier in the year, but we're not super confident in that in this one. And now let's look at Cincinnati at Iowa State. This is yet another very important game in the Big 12 this week. Cincinnati, like the last few teams on this list, is looking to end the year strong after the last couple games haven't gone their way. They haven't been as efficient running the ball the past couple weeks as they were at the beginning of the year, but they're facing a team on an even more unfortunate skid in Iowa State, who's dropped their last 2 games in a row after starting the year undefeated, and they're coming off a terrible loss to Kansas. Their defense had a complete letdown game and let the Jayhawks score 45 points with over 530 total yards. So it will be interesting to see which of these teams can bounce back in this one and get the much needed W. And for your group of 5 highlight matchup, it's going to be 13th ranked Boise State at San Jose State. We are cheating a little bit here. We'll get more into that in a second, but this is a big game out of the Mountain West. It's the conference leading Boise State Broncos led by Ashton Jeanty and Maddox Madsen taking on the San Jose State Spartans. And this one is specifically interesting because Nevada just took Boise to the wire last week, and San Jose is coming off a win over Oregon State, whose offense is very similar to Boise State's, albeit not as effective, but still a very run-heavy offense. But it's probably going to come down to the kind of performance the Boise State defense is going to have here. If they come out and allow Walker Eget to have the kind of looks that Nevada had last week, they could be staring in the barrel of their second loss of the year. Not sure that'll happen though. We're pretty confident in Jeanty and Madsen. We think they'll be able to put together a great game and pull this one out. And now let's look at your big impact matchups, starting with 25th ranked Tulane at Navy. Like we said, this is what we're kind of cheating here with the group of 5 highlight matchup, but we couldn't help but include this one in our big impact matchups because this truly is a big impact matchup. Tulane, like Army, like Boise State, is a team vying for that group of 5 auto bid into the playoffs, and they're going up against a Navy team who has very obviously had an amazing rush offense led by Blake Horvath, their quarterback, as well as a few other great contributors. But that midshipman defense has not been on the same level as of late, especially not on that of Tulane's. They've been excellent, only allowed about 14 points per game in conference play this year, and they're led by Darian Mensah at quarterback and Mekhi Hughes, who's averaged over 5.5 yards per carry with over 1,300 scrimmage yards and 15 touchdowns at running back this year. 2 great squads battling it out atop the American Conference, and we're ready to watch this one play out. And now let's look at second ranked Texas at Arkansas. Arkansas has been on a bit of a slide in recent weeks. They've dropped 3 of their last 5 and lost big to Ole Miss in their last game 2 weeks ago, but they absolutely have the firepower to pull off an upset here in our opinion if they can hold on to the ball and be more efficient on the ground. But they're going to be facing a Texas team that looks like it's gearing up for November football. They went out and stomped Florida last week, but they're going to have to travel to Fayetteville this weekend and play on the road, something that proved to be a big factor in their only other true conference road game this year against Vanderbilt 2 weeks ago. There's a lot at play here, but if they get the ground game working early and get Ewers in a groove like they did last week, it should be smooth sailing for the Longhorns. And now let's look at 17th ranked Clemson at Pitt. Both of these squads have seen their share of ups and downs the past few weeks. Pitt more so than Clemson, but both of these teams are coming into the week at 7-2, both still with ACC title aspirations on the line. But for Clemson, it's going to be about pushing the ball down the field. You have Maffa at tailback. He's going to be reliable, but we want to see Garrett Riley take more shots with Klubnik, be more aggressive, especially because we saw that work last week to some degree. More jump balls, more deep shots, and if they can grab a lead early in this one, they should be in a good spot, but that is a big if, especially because Pitt has been effective at stopping the run this year, which will be Clemson's strong suit if they choose to be conservative, and they could have Eli Holstein back from injury this week. He's been a very solid dual threat guy for them at quarterback, and they've got a great dual threat running back that can really throw the Clemson defense for a loop in Desmond Reed. Interesting matchup for sure. Will Pitt be able to rebound at home, or will Clemson continue to soar towards the title game? We will see, but next we have 21st ranked LSU at Florida. This one is looking like a great matchup for all the wrong reasons, or right depending on how you look at it. LSU is coming off 2 big losses back-to-back against Texas A&M and Alabama, got straight up curb stomped at home last week versus Bama, and the question is, will they be able to bounce back in Gainesville versus the Florida Gators? They also had a pretty bad week last week, but they're still not a bad team. Been dealing with injuries. DJ Lagway looks to be returning this week, which sets up a pretty underrated quarterback matchup in Lagway versus Nussmeier. Probably would not have said that earlier in the year, but Nussmeier has had a bit of a come down off a pretty big high from earlier in the season. He's had a rough couple weeks, which makes this one all the more exciting for us. And now let's look at 24th ranked Missouri at 23rd ranked South Carolina. We get why Missouri's ranked. They're a 7-2 SEC team, yada yada yada, but South Carolina is the real deal. Missouri has been fairly fraudulent all year, haven't shown up at all in big games, unlike the South Carolina Gamecocks, who have been able to play their best football when the lights are the brightest. They've just got it this year. That's the best way to describe it. The defense is great. Pass rushers have been amazing. Sellers and Sanders have been a great 1-2 punch in their backfield. They're a great squad, and we fully expect them to win here. And last, for your big impact matchups, it's Arizona State at 20th ranked Kansas State. This matchup is very, very underrated coming into this week. Both of these teams sit at 7-2. Both are still in the mix for the Big 12 title game. Kind of a similar deal to what we talked about in the ACC just a few games ago. And both of these teams are about even. They both run the ball very effectively. They both have dual threat quarterbacks, both have a high-end lead rusher, solid-ish defenses, and that means this one's set to be a slobber knocker. Who can break away those big chunk yard plays late? Who can make the one big stop when they need it? We will have to find out, but the tide could turn in either team's favor with the official ruling on Sun Devil running back Cam Scadabo's availability this week. He's on track to play, which would give Arizona State a huge advantage here, but if he's ruled out or still has that nagging injury, it could turn the tide for the Wildcats in this one. And for your O&O Sports game of the week, it is the 6th ranked Tennessee Volunteers taking on the 11th ranked Georgia Bulldogs. And what a matchup this will be. This is the breaking point for each of these teams. Wouldn't be surprised if the loser of this one doesn't see the playoffs this year. But for Georgia, they are in much more dire straits than Tennessee this week. It just feels like this team's checked out, or that they were never really checked in. With the off-the-field issues, the players celebrating with rival fans, it feels like Georgia, for whatever reason, isn't taking their schedule seriously. Could be wrong. That's just how it feels. Especially after last week, like we said, 3 turnovers, not even 300 total yards of offense. They're going to need to play better against a Tennessee team whose quarterback is questionable this week after sustaining a concussion in last week's game. Not good news if you're a Volunteer fan, but the good news is that Dylan Sampson is perfectly fine. Your offense has run through him this year. He's had a very efficient season considering the volume he's had. Over 1,200 scrimmage yards and 20 touchdowns. Great year for him, and that defense has looked a lot better recently after struggling somewhat early on. There's a lot of ifs in this game, a lot of question marks, but for your players to watch in this one, for the Volunteers, it will be Dylan Sampson, like we said. Over 1,200 scrimmage yards, a ton of touchdowns. The offense has ran through him this year, and they'll need to again in this one if they want to win here, especially if they're without Nico in this game. But whoever starts at quarterback in this one will have to figure out how to navigate around Georgia's player to watch. It's the linebacker, Jalen Walker. 40 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, a pass defense, and 2 fumble recoveries for the linebacker here. And he's been able to get pressure on quarterbacks at a high rate this year. He's made his presence felt all over the field, and for the Bulldogs, he is your player to watch in this one. And now let's move on to upset watch with our good friend Todd. Everybody say hey to Todd. Thank you. And we're going to start with SMU versus Boston College, who is an 18.5 point underdog this week. This one is very interesting considering the new quarterback element at play for the Eagles could reinvigorate that offense. And to be honest, they've needed a quarterback who can push drives forward with his arm desperately. And it seems, at least on paper, they found that in Grayson James. Todd likes Boston College to beat the spread here, so he's got this one at a 7 out of 10 on the upset scale. But ultimately, we think SMU is going to pull this one out. And now let's look at Oregon at Wisconsin, who's only a 14.5 point underdog in this one, surprisingly. Like we said earlier, this one's going to come down to if Wisconsin can effectively run the ball on the Ducks. Braden Locke is decent, but in our eyes, essentially a worse Luke Altmaier, who Oregon beat earlier in the year, and we're not very confident they'll be able to do that, even with a bustling Camp Randall behind them. Me and Todd both like Oregon to win and probably cover here, with Todd grading this one at a 4 on the upset scale. And now let's look at 9th ranked BYU versus Kansas, who's only a 2.5 point underdog in this one. Yet another small spread for BYU. They've dealt with these a lot this year, and last week is the first real time it's been a close battle. But even with the win last week and the revamped offense, Todd likes BYU here, and it isn't particularly close. He's got this one at a 2 out of 10 on our upset scale. And last, let's look at our big impact predictions. It's the moment you've all been waiting for, folks. Here are all of our matchups this week, and it's looking like yet another great slate. Let's start with Tulane at Navy. This is said to be one of the biggest matchups of the weekend. Who cares about what conference it's in? It's going to be huge. And with that said, we like Tulane more than we like Navy in recent weeks. Navy has shown it can slip up and give away possessions. They're essentially a less efficient Army, and we think Tulane's offense and defense is better suited to win a game against a team like Navy out of most of the other teams in that conference. So with that, give us the green wave to win this one 37-34. And now let's look at Texas at Arkansas. Arkansas looked like a bit of an SEC boogeyman team earlier in the year. They looked really good to start the year and got a big win over Tennessee. That gave us hope for them, but they've looked like they've been regressing the past few weeks, somewhat due to injury and somewhat due to offensive inconsistency. So even though this one's going to be at home for the Razorbacks, we like Texas to win this one 35-20. And now let's look at Clemson at Pitt. This is a very close matchup. The added effect of it being played in Pittsburgh makes this one really close in our opinion. Even this late in the year, we're not exactly sure who Pitt is, especially after last week. Will they look like the Pitt of the first 9 weeks of the year or the Pitt of the last 2? We're going to have to find out, but we know exactly who Clemson is, and they're capable of winning these kinds of games, and we think they win this one here with a final score of 28-21. And now let's look at LSU at Florida. We think this one's going to come down to the wire. We think Florida could potentially beat the spread in this one, especially if DJ Lagway is healthy. If not, we don't have a lot of confidence in that Florida offense, but if so, we think this one will come down to 1 or 2 possessions. We're going to bet on him returning this week and do what Florida has been working up towards all year, which is potentially Billy Napier's biggest win of his career thus far over the LSU Tigers, 31-30. And now let's look at Missouri at South Carolina. Like we said earlier, we have a lot of confidence in South Carolina in this one. It's a ranked versus ranked matchup, so we had no choice to include it in our big impact matchups this week, but otherwise we'd be willing to bet the Gamecocks win here and win big at that with a final score of 34-17. And now let's look at Arizona State at Kansas State. This one is very, very close in nearly every metric. I was kind of scared to ask Todd about this matchup because I figured he'd tell me it was essentially a toss-up game here, and what you know, that's exactly what he told us. But we're going to go with the team we think has been a little more efficient, a little more experienced, and a little bit healthier, and we think that team is Kansas State. It's also bonus they'll have home field advantage, and we think this one finishes with a final score of 30-24. And for your O&O Sports game of the week, Tennessee at Georgia. This is going to be a huge matchup, like we've said a lot already in this episode. There's a lot at stake here. Tennessee is currently first in the SEC at 5-1 in conference play. Georgia's fourth at 5-2. And we expect this one to be a dogfight, no pun intended. To us, it'll be a matter of which team's defense can stand a little taller in this matchup, and we think that team will be Georgia. Nico is battling injury, not sure how he'll look, not sure if he'll even be back, and unless Dylan Sampson forces Georgia into an abnormal day, we expect that defensive front to be able to at least manage that rushing attack, take out a few of those explosive runs, and force Tennessee into a quarterback duel, which we think Georgia will win 27-21. Will probably be a sloppy matchup. Don't expect great performances from either team, but will be an amazingly fun game to watch either way. And that's going to wrap it up for this episode. It was the Week 12 preview. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe, and be sure to tune in later in the weekend for our recap of the week. Thank you for watching, and we will see you there.